Hello and welcome to Team Franco Bodybuilding Podcast. This is Joe, which you obviously know by now. Hoping everything is going great for you, both in and out of the gym. And we're going to continue the topic about contest prep. But before we get started, I just want to thank everyone again for listening, sharing, subscribing. It means the world to me because I just love putting information out there. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But it's also a nice outlet for me because I've learned so much over the years, coaching thousands of people, promoting shows, having posing classes, working with people one-on-one, that anecdotal information can be very valuable, and it's self-experience information where I could possibly help you, whether if you have a coach or not, or thinking about competing, or have competed before and find that you can do a different path to reach your goal. That is my objective for putting these out there. So like I said, we're going to continue talking about contest prep. And to explain what exactly I'm going to talk about, you have to understand car culture a little bit, where obviously you read the title. Let's get that out of the way. You can't redline during your entire contest prep. Now, if you are a car guy or car girl and you know what redlining means, great. But for the audience out there that doesn't, it simply means that you are redlining, taking the tachometer before a gear changes and running it really high. And what can this do to the automobile is actually blow the engine. I'm not going to get too crazy with car geekness, but redlining is very risky when it comes to drag racing or driving a stick shift. Obviously, you want to get all the RPMs out as much as possible before you go to the next gear. But you're putting wear tear on the car, and the car may yell at you and be like, we can't do this. You're driving me too hard, so I'm going to blow up. So that's why I thought this topic was apropos, where I have seen it firsthand with clients, firsthand with people reaching out to me during their prep or after their prep, or fear of, thinking that they have to redline it, push it hard constantly to go through their prep. So that's how I came up with this clever title. Now, there are outliers. Don't get me wrong. I have clients that could redline it. They don't complain. They have that tunnel vision to the point where you're like, wow, how are they pulling this off? But the majority of us shouldn't be thinking that you can redline it for a productive prep. And that's what I wanted to dig in deeper, because if you do fall into the camp of thinking you got a red line, or if you do have the type A personality that's redlining it, there are other options, but there's also consequences. And knowing my philosophies, if you are a listener or know about Team Franco Bodybuilding, is all about sustainability. It's all about, having a good time, but understanding that, I'm going to be hungry. I am going to have to grind some of these workouts. But you got to pay attention to some of the signs on learning to back off a little bit, to focus on other things a little bit, and what have you, by listening to your body. So that's why I have a few notes that I want to cover. Now, people who fall into this category, they're not lazy. They are super driven. They care. They want to do well, which I respect. But the consequences where it could be dangerous is that at one point, if you constantly want to redline your contest prep, they automatically think more cardio is better. I got to really push the workouts to the limit. Less food will equal faster fat loss. And pushing through everything else will actually prove that I have the discipline for a contest prep. But prep isn't meant to be lived at the max intensity for months on end. And how you manage your prep just doesn't affect your physique. It will affect your metabolism, your mindset, your relationships, and also your post-show life. So what does redlining really look like? Okay, that's what I want to cover next. And when I said redlining, here's what it usually looks like for that particular person that has that mindset to begin with. They feel like every workout is almost like a survival mode where they got to crush it. They got to spend hours in the gym thinking more is always better. And as I talked about just a minute ago, all right, if they're doing 3 days a week, 30 minutes of cardio, right away they'll double that and they go to 6 weeks, 30 minutes, instead of taking incremental steps on learning what could be done. They may be in a calorie deficit as soon as they start. For example, if their normal intake is 1,500 calories, they'll drop it to 1,000 right away. And if they don't have the patience, then they'll start shaving off of that. But what can these things do to your body that's not optimal is that their sleep quality will eventually drop. You're constantly sore. You're not recovering. You're irritable and you're mentally drained. Now, full disclosure, I understand that if you're a higher level competitor and you are within 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks out, you do enter what I call that suck zone. And some of these things may happen only because your calories are lower, but you still have the muscle tissue. But you're prepped from day one, either if it's 12 weeks, 20 weeks out, you shouldn't be doing these things to yourself. But if you are doing these things right away, eventually your progress is going to slow down, guys. And that's when people usually double down. They, instead of listening to their body and not redline it, and basically what I suggest to do is to take the foot off the gas pedal to reset, they'll double down. They'll push harder. They'll grind harder. Like I said, do more cardio, less food, all that. And there are outcomes to that if you constantly do it. When you diet aggressively for too long and too hard, excuse me, your metabolism will adapt. And this is point number one. Plain and simple, it'll slow down. Your body becomes more efficient. Energy expenditure drops. Fat loss stalls. Again, this is not failure, it's biology. Because what happens if you started off at that 1,500 calorie, drop it to 1,000 right away, your metabolism is pretty smart, and your hormones are even smarter, where it's going to say, I don't like this. I got to slow down my metabolic rate because I'm doing all this extra cardio. I cut my calories so fast that I need to slow down for survival mode. And typically that can lead to metabolic adaptation. And these are the warning signs where you just slow down, you feel more irritable, lack of sleep, and it really shouldn't be happening at all if you're doing a prep properly. But if you are redlining it and have that mentality, you will push through. You will refuse to eat more. You'll refuse to pull back. And you'll consider, instead of having a surplus and bumping it up or a reset, you'll just push harder. And that is the danger zone. And it can only make the problem worse over time. So this is where a good coach can come into play, or just using your instincts. And you got to shut yourself down because you have that type A red line mentality of grind, grind, grind. But if the body's not responding, and if you're not being patient, after a week's change or 10 days or even 2 weeks of just evaluating to see how the data is going, but then right away you're like every 3 days, more cardio, less food, longer workouts, seclude myself, that is a recipe for disaster. And this is my friendly reminder that sometimes you just need to reset. And why strategic pullbacks matter. And that's what I would refer if you're falling into that camp. Sometimes it's the smartest move in your prep, guys. It's intentionally easing things up. And it would just be, for example, a short surplus, maybe 3 or 4 days of bumping up the carbs, which can then actually help reduce stress on the body, give the body a chance to feel safe again, and it can restore performance, recovery, and all those little things that we're after. But when people are mentally redlining, they see that as a weakness, not as a strategy. Now, when I'm working with a client and I see they're making great progress, and I know they're nailing it, I know they're nailing it both in and out of the gym. And if we are many weeks out, I will give them a few days of like, you know what? Let's back off the cardio. I call it a cardio break. And in addition, I may add a few more grams of carbs, depending on the person. And miraculously, they think I'm a genius because 3 or 4 days later, the scale will drop. They'll feel better. Yeah, their hunger may kick up because of hormones and leptin and all that stuff. But all of a sudden, they're like, wow, that mental break of not, being on the treadmill for 30 minutes and, having 30 more grams of carbs over the last 3 days, that was a great reset. And then it gives you a clearer picture about how the body actually works. And that is something that I will do when someone is nailing it, granted. Now, if you're not nailing it, yeah, you're in a different ballpark as far as, and you're not redlining. But when it comes to people that are aggressive, pushing it hard, every once in a while, you have to learn to back off. And also doing that will give you more energy, but not only gives you the respect about how redlining affects people around you. And this is something that I've talked about in different podcasts over the years. And I think it honestly doesn't get talked about enough, because when you redline your contest prep, it just doesn't affect you. It affects people around you. Now, you don't need to have 100% support from everyone in your life when you do a contest prep. I get it. Some people just don't understand it. Maybe they're jealous. Maybe they see that, why are you bothering? Whatever. But a prep should never destroy your relationships. If you have a good relationship going in, don't be the person to ruin it. Now, again, when you're chronically under-eating, under-sleeping, over-stress, the symptoms from that, you become short-tempered, I get it, withdrawn, you have less patience, you're less present, and that tension will carry over to whatever relationship that you may have with a significant other or your spouses, your family, your friends, coworkers, or whatever. Now, prep just isn't then becoming physical stress. It becomes an emotional stress. That is something that I believe doesn't get talked enough. Actually, a podcast that I did a couple weeks ago, I touched upon this, because you see sometimes contest preps with people that redline it. They may have a dicey relationship to begin with, but they go through it anyway, and the relationship's over, point blank. Now, that you have to weigh out for yourself if it's worth it or not. Everyone has different fingerprints. It is what it is. I get it. But this is an outcome for those who constantly have the, foot on the gas pedal, pushing the body too hard, where you can affect it as far as relationships goes. In addition to that, and I touched upon it in the beginning, when you constantly redline it and all these things tied together, it's going to affect your cortisol, you're stressed, and actually it's a hidden cost where you don't see it as much, meaning it ties into the physiology of the body and why the body is possibly slowing down, and chronic stress in itself will elevate cortisol. A contest prep is hard enough on the body, and I'll revert back to what I call the suck zone, which is inevitable. The last few weeks, depending on, again, what kind of level competitor you're at. Cortisol levels are going to fluctuate. They are going to increase. That's going to affect everything. But if you're constantly redlining it from day one of your prep, it's going to, again, elevate your cortisol. And when that happens, it's going to make fat loss harder. It's going to impact your sleep. It's going to impair recovery. It's going to disrupt hunger cues and worsens, again, metabolic adaptation. So you see how all these things are intertwined. So when a prep starts creating friction everywhere in your life, it's just not a mindset issue. It also becomes a hormonal one. You're literally making prep harder by constantly redlining it and pushing it all the time. Now, the final point that I like to touch upon, or almost final point, which you may not be thinking of during your prep, where you are redlining it, and if this is a drinking game, I wonder how many times I've said it already. But in all seriousness, it's afterwards, because when you're in the prep, you're having great feedback, you're doing your weekly check-ins, you're looking good, you're pushing it. But if you're constantly pushing it too hard, it's going to affect post-show. your recovery after you compete. And I've done a couple of podcasts talking about this stuff years ago, and they're actually one of my most listened to, and I called it Exit Plan. So you can search Team Franco Exit Plan, and it's a 2-part series on how I like to handle that. But in conjunction with this topic, as it will carry straight into the post-show phase. And to me, that is almost important, or sometimes for some equally important than the prep itself. Because you don't want to be that person gaining 40 pounds after you compete and wiped everything out. But again, on the topic of hand, when you redline it, you know that your metabolism is suppressed. Cortisol is high. Again, mindset is rigid, and it's hard to figure out what the hell to do afterwards. And again, you have some strained relationships. So post-show can be kind of chaotic, to say the least. And that's when I see those severe rebounds, emotional eating, body dysmorphia, guilt around food, and then the worst case scenario, resentment of the sport. Now, I believe that this can be all self-inflicted, but I also believe that there are certain coaches out there that don't give a shit about the post-show. They just care that you look good on stage, let it be, and then, they may give you some guidance, but then they're not focused on your post-show or your recovery diet, and I don't think that's fair to you, because again, I've seen so many competitors swear they would never compete again, not because bodybuilding is bad, because the process was mismanaged by whoever was teaching them what to do during that. And personally, I will push people. Yes, I will push, but everyone's on a different level. And emotionally, if they're a beginner client, competitor, and I get a good feel for them, I'll push them as hard as I think they should go, because I don't want them to have resentment and look back and say, I never want to do this again. My goal and objective is to give them an opportunity, have a great time on stage, and be like, you know what? This was awesome. I can't wait to do it again. Or, you know what? It was a one and done, but I'm so proud and I have no regrets. So that to me is what really matters. But quite often, if you are redlining your prep, or that's how your coach teaches it, it can lead down to a spiral, and it's not a fun outcome at all. So the final topic and thing I want to talk about, and this is where the confusion comes into play, where people, when they redline it, again, gassing it, pushing it, they think that's discipline, where it's not discipline. And to me, that is also an issue. The competitors who last the longest understand that prep is temporary. Your health, relationships, and mindset are long-term. That's it. That's you. It's a lifestyle. You learn how to manage the intensity. You listen to feedback among the data that you collect or from your coach. You respect the actual stress that's going on, physical and emotional. That is real discipline. When you listen to the cues of your body and your mind during the prep and be able to change paths accordingly to keep things going without going overboard and pushing your body too hard. Because again, it will lead to everything else that I talked about over the last few minutes. So you have to ask yourself, am I prepping in a way that supports my body? Or am I redlining and just hoping for the best that and it's going to work out, because this is what I think needs to be done? Now, people can do it. As I talked about in the intro, people can do it. I've seen it. I have clients that can do it. But there's really no need to. And I'm trying to let you guys know anecdotally through myself competing and thousands of people that I've coached, that once you learn how to change lanes, listen to your body, keep the discipline, be willing to change, you're going to have a more successful prep instead of thinking going all out and pushing it to the full brink where you could possibly screw everything up and even quit during your prep. So hopefully this has been helpful. And I just want to constantly remind you guys that I'm here for you. And If you want coaching that respects the full picture, from prep to post-show to real life, you always can feel free to reach out to me. Best way is fitfranco@verizon.net. Check me out on the socials, Team Franco Bodybuilding, Joe Franco on Instagram, and all that good stuff. I'll talk to you next time. Be well.